Gender-based violence is one which has prompted targeted action by the government of St. Lucia to bring an end to it. One such measure, the implementation of the Domestic Violence Act in 2022, permanently changed the manner in which domestic violence is addressed. Today I have with me two esteemed guests, Minister with Responsibility for Gender Affairs, Honorable Dr. Virginia Albert Poyot, and His Excellency Francis Etienne, Ambassador of France to St. Lucia, who will be discussing a partnership designed to bring a halt to gender-based violence. Madam Minister and Monsieur Ambassador, welcome.
Okay.
Welcome, Keba.
Welcome.
We begin with a look at the Stop Gender-Based Violence project, which was launched in May 2023 and how it was conceptualized. Mr. Ambassador, there are many areas under which the embassy could have extended support. How was an initiative aimed at ending gender-based violence chosen?
Well, Keba, I would say there are three main reasons. One, because it's natural. Second, because it's logical. And third, because it's a necessity. Very briefly, it's natural because we have a tradition based on one conviction in France. The conviction is that there has to be a rule of law. There has to be a legal framework. If we want to fight violence, the very first instrument, the very first tool needs to be a legal framework. So when you look at history, we invented the Declaration of Human Rights and Citizens' Rights in 1789, main contribution of the French Revolution, and then we extended it first in our constitutions, and then we contributed to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the UN in 1948. We want this to be taken into account in the present day. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, it's logical because we want to have and to promote a feminist diplomacy. And this is a commitment on the side of my president, Emmanuel Macron, since he was elected in 2017. Priority of the first mandate, priority of the second mandate since 2022. No small talk, big money. We created in 2019 a fund. President decided to have a fund for which we mobilized 134 million euros and gave them to 1,000 associations in 75 different countries. One of them is precisely the topic of the day, the Stop Gender-Based Violence here in St. Lucia. And the third reason, it's a necessity. Well, clearly there is a sense of urgency for all of us. We need to address the issue, and violence is not a story for St. Lucia alone or for St. Lucia specifically. We have an issue as well. We have several issues actually with violence. Just to give you one example on what we call in French feminicide, every third day a woman is killed by companion, husband or spouse in France. And this has been lasting for the last 10 years. We say stop now. As well as we have to stop here in St. Lucia, we have to stop in France. And the lessons drawn here will be used for us in France.
So speaking to you, Madam Minister, and how St. Lucia is expected to benefit, can you outline perhaps what you hope can emerge from this project, how St. Lucia can benefit from it?
Well, the genesis of this project really emerged after we had the passage of the Domestic Violence Act on 8th of March 2022. And with this act, St. Lucia actually created history where we repealed the previous legislation and we brought in this new legislation. And this Domestic Violence Act, which was passed, created waves in the Caribbean and globally. And I am very convinced, having discussion with the ambassador, that they did hear St. Lucia. That topic dominated the media for 3 weeks as headlines. And regionally, we got quite a bit of positive response that came from different organizations And I also went to the United Nations, and there I also articulated some of the very significant points in that bill. And with that loud clarion call, our French partner heard that call, and they are coming to our rescue. And they have agreed to invest 600,000 euro in looking at gender-based violence to give us support to make this bill a reality. And it will be a project that would last for 2 years. We will be engaging in sensitizing the public, engaging the police, and a number of other stakeholders who need to be aware on how we can combat gender-based violence. Because I am of the view that with gender-based violence and violence in general, that affects productivity in the country. It affects development. And therefore, we need to live in a society where there is no violence, and there should be no violence between men and women in our society.
Mr. Ambassador, of course, you spoke to the policy of your government with regard to gender-based violence, and the minister referenced the Domestic Violence Act, which would have been initiated. How do you believe this project can perhaps assist with capacity building so that that act can continue to be implemented on island?
Well, it will definitely have an impact, and we're aiming at serving as a landmark. We want the project here in St. Lucia to be a reference for other Eastern Caribbean countries within the OECS in the years to come. So we are, in a sense, experimenting here, but we want this to be a model for the rest of the Caribbean, and we want it to be a model for ourselves. There will be lessons drawn from the St. Lucian experience, the way associations will be involved, the way the people react, the way communication works, which will be lessons for us in France. And we want to use that material, that experience, for our own benefit. So it's really a story of partnership.
Madam Minister, so prior to assuming the role of Minister for Gender Affairs, you of course worked as a member of civil society. Reflecting on your experience, how important do you believe is an engagement of the wider society in this partnership and the gender-based violence response on island?
Well, based on my own experience, we cannot get legislation being effective and implemented without the participation of the wider society. And I believe that civil society and non-governmental organizations have a critical role to play in supporting government's initiative. So this project basically will be targeting civil society organizations and NGOs so that we reach the wider community in understanding why we need to live in a peaceful society for all. Without the support, government agency will not be able to do much. And with the support of civil society and NGO, the resources that we are getting from our partners, that's the French, that will go a long way because they will put in their own sweat, their own experience and contribution. And that is what is important in partnership, where the partner actually make a contribution to the wider good and the goals that we have to achieve.
And we share this conviction. Without people being committed, because we're talking about a fight here. We're talking about changing habits. We're talking about new behaviors, new attitudes. We need the people who are themselves feeling very committed and then raise awareness and raise consciousness among the wider population. So the words of the minister are actually absolutely true. Without associations, without civil society actors and people really committed, we couldn't possibly succeed. What is true for Domestic Violence Act, in truth, will be true as well for us, for our own improvement. We need to change habits in the community.
Mr. Ambassador, of course, you would have made a reference to the position of the French government in terms of supporting this sort of ideology, in terms of bringing an end to gender-based violence. Can you speak to perhaps your own personal commitment and passion for this particular project?
Well, it's a story starting with the Me Too movement, because when you look at history, recent history, Actually, what happened with Me Too was extremely impacting our own vision of things in France, and it influenced our policymakers in Parliament. So we changed our law on the 6th of August 2019 with a very important piece of legislation saying that in a workforce, violence at large, and especially harassment, be it sexual or be it moral, couldn't be accepted. Rule was zero tolerance. And I happen to be in charge of that system, of that organization to be set up within the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs. So I have a personal experience of what it means to fight against a kind of violence. And I would like to say very simple things. Point one, it was necessary. Point two, it is effective. Point three, the real issue is to push people who were keeping silent, who were not daring to take the floor, to expose certain things, to dare to do that. And that is a fantastic challenge for our civil society, but for everybody, and first for the government. And in this, we share the proper goal of Domestic Violence Act, or stopping violence in this case, of course. If we want to be effective, we don't have to sanction, we have to deter. We have to avoid violence to happen. And that means procedures, communications, commitment, and people daring to speak, which is a big challenge for everybody.
Okay. At this point, we have quite a bit more to examine on the subject area, but of course, a brief commercial break is what we will enter into. Please stick with the broadcast.
Do you know me? I've been forced to do this by my trafficker. I was promised a better life, but got forced into domestic servitude. I can be any age. I can be any gender, any ethnicity. I am a victim of trafficking in persons. Know the signs, see it, report it. If you see me, please help me. Call the TIP hotline at 847.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, I am Kiba Talium, and in today's discussion, we are examining the Stop the Gender-Based Violence Project in St. Lucia and the OECS. With me is Minister with Responsibility for Gender Affairs, Honorable Dr. Virginia Albert Poyot, and His Excellency, Mr. Francis Etienne. Before the break, we examined the expected structure of the project and the policy which influenced its implementation. However, as we know, people are at the heart of this initiative. How is it expected to reach people?
We need to work on communication. We need to work on kits being made available to everybody. We need to work on relays, and that's what we are very happy to work with 13 associations so far, and we dearly expect the number will raise. It's a story of multiplication. Some people who are really committed will spread the message, and then some people who are not necessarily very familiar with the matter will say, oh, this is worth doing, I'm going to repeat myself. It's a very educational process, and most certainly in this process, schools, teachers, and specialists in pedagogy will play a very important role. So we will call on their participation.
It's interesting that you reference schools and teachers, because we also have a former educator in the person of our minister. So, Madam Minister, in terms of the external support received, how can this propel the cause of eliminating gender-based violence on island?
Okay, now there is a great urgency to end gender-based violence and domestic violence. And I felt the push after we passed the domestic violence bill. A number of persons, especially men, within 1 month, asked me why they had not ended gender-based violence or domestic violence. And it is one where the general public has such high expectation of the outcome of this act that they would have seen immediate results. But as Ambassador indicated, there is what we call our culture, certain behavior patterns that will not change overnight. And therefore, we need to engage in very rigorous activities and programs to build that level of consciousness and awareness to begin to change behavior. And the issue of combating gender-based violence is one that St. Lucia has been working on since 1982, when we ratified the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And so far we have had a number of structures that we have put in place. And the recent Domestic Violence Act is just one additional step. With the support of our French partners, we know the whole process will be expedited. With their own experience coming to give us support, the level of financial resources and the support and the anxiety on the ground is what will propel this project to be a great success.
We can give you an example. Jokes. Jokes are sometimes extremely disrespectful. Jokes are sometimes extremely hurting. But this goes without saying, en passant, you can allow yourself to make remarks on the shape of a body of a woman. Things like this, today, not acceptable. When I spoke about zero tolerance before, I mean it. There is a time, an age, and this is now, where jokes, which may be resented as being aggressive, as being disrespectful, can't be accepted anymore. Can't be accepted. So maybe this sounds extremely serious, but actually if we want to change attitudes, there are certain reactions on the side of the people which have to change. And so some other people have to raise their hand and say, sorry, excuse me, you can't speak like that. You can't address someone this way. You can't make fun of someone being hurtful. Very simple. In reality, quite hard to implement, but we will strive on it, and I'm sure we can improve.
And it's interesting that you also mentioned...
there is the significant point which I want to stress, that there is a difference between gender-based violence and domestic violence. With gender-based violence, it is violence between men and women, where you are attacked because you are a woman, you are beaten, you are insulted because you are a woman, or you are attacked because you are a man, you are beaten because you are a man. It deals with gender as to whether you are a man or a woman, you're getting some form of violence. But with domestic violence, we're looking at the violence that happens within the domestic setting, which involves a man and a woman in a home or living or having a relationship. And it also involves children, because children are also involved in domestic violence. So we want to get the public to understand that whereas we're talking about violence, we are talking about gender-based violence, and we are talking about domestic violence. These are very critical areas that we need to clarify.
And mentioning kids is a very hot debate at the moment in France, where the awareness about the violence against kids is really top of the agenda in the public sphere. We have stats which are extremely worrying, but we admit that this is a fact, that 10% of the kids, that makes quite a number of people, are victims of violence. And so we have to address the issue, again, because in St. Lucia, as well as in France, it's a big topic. It's a big topic. And the only way we can address the issue is to state the facts and address with lucidity things which are hard to swallow, hard to admit, but there are facts, and now we have to change.
In the previous part of our conversation, you made a reference to the impact of cultural attitudes on this particular subject, the fact that it needs to be embraced. and cultural change needs to happen. You also made reference to the fact that St. Lucia is the starting point, but there's an intention to expand the reach of this throughout different islands within the UCS. Perhaps you can make a slight reference to that and this intention.
Well, we make St. Lucia specific again because we see reasons for partnership thanks to the change in the law. It's exactly the same spirit and it's exactly the same kind of framework that we want to see implemented in France. But obviously, as I said, this is a universal issue. So the solutions have to be spread as much as possible. We're not saying we have the solution for everybody. We are saying the ways we're going to improve communication, awareness, they may be spread the same way elsewhere here, in Dominica, in St. Vincent, in Grenada, and so on, in the French Caribbean as well, and in the French metropolitan country as well. There are all good reasons for us now to really go for it. Really go for it. And if we invent something great, and I'm sure we will, it will spread. And if we don't succeed right now, others will come. Other attempts will come. But there are no reasons why we couldn't see that the framework, the legal framework, can't be implemented. I think all countries have to support each other in a fight like this. I'm calling it a fight because it's not something simple. And it means determination, not from one day to another, over a long period of time. We're starting for 2 years. It would probably last longer.
And while we talk about domestic violence and gender-based violence, we are talking about the situation of crime. And it actually starts in the home. It starts with the youth, and later on we see it in the wider society. We have seen an upsurge in crime in the society, and people are actually screaming. But we have to work on prevention. We are looking at care and cure. But before we reach that stage, we must first prevent it. And that is why we have to start at the school level to begin to change the mindset of the children so that the next generation will not experience what we are experiencing today. We have to start in the home. We have to change the mindset of the parents so that they do not display the level of violence in the home, which these children, look, school reopened. And after school reopened, we are seeing that the children are fighting among each other. So we don't know what these children have been exposed to. And if we combat the issue of domestic violence, gender-based violence, that's the beginning of the prevention, so that later we do not have to spend so much money in trying to care and cure violence. As Minister with responsibility for Home Affairs, and you see what's happening at the Borderley Correctional Facilities. The majority of persons who are admitted in that facility are young persons. So we see that as a form of prevention of crime and violence in the society.
And what you stated just speaks to what the ambassador mentioned with regard to communication and spreading the message, which is of course something that is going to be facilitated through this particular project. We are preparing to enter a particularly important period with the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence beginning on November 25th. So what do you hope can emerge from this project within this time, or how do you hope this particular period within the context of this project can be observed?
Better resonance, better awareness. Again, it's funny because in a way, funny. It's strange because in a way, women have to take the floor, men have to stop. On one gender side, the problem was the lack of freedom to speak, or the absence of daring to speak. And on the men, it's stopping attitudes which were offensive, aggressive, and often criminal. But it's not only that. It's the fact that simple people in situations which are completely unexpected, like in a transport, for instance, or in a restaurant, would raise their hands and say, oh, sorry, what you just said is not acceptable. Or, sorry, sir, stop the gesture. You are violent. This can't be admitted. Some way, new reactions are expected on both sides, on both genders. And if during the 16 days we can contribute to that, we will be on a good path.
I see the presence of the support from our French partner, giving us the additional support to make the observation of the 16th day of activism a bigger affair. For too long, we have been doing it as though it is just a little idea, a little concept from the Department of Gender Affairs. And some people see it as a sideshow. Now we have to bring the people in the mix. They have to play center stage. And if we can galvanize the support from the general public to make it a part of their responsibility to combat gender-based violence and domestic violence, it is one that will bring about greater results. And we need to have it activated in all communities in St. Lucia, not just a little exhibition or a little speech on the radio or over there, and people see it as they have nothing to do with that. We want St. Lucians to embrace the whole idea of combating the whole idea of gender-based violence and domestic violence. And the whole project is actually taken off on the 5th of October. 5th of October is very significant for me because this is World Teachers' Day. So it is an opportunity to educate as many people as possible so that they become sensitive and aware of the situation and begin to take action.
So you mentioned, of course, that it's a significant date. I know that there is a workshop which is planned for that particular date. Any information can be presented on that?
Well, we are bringing all the stakeholders together so that we can see what role each stakeholder can play in combating the issue of domestic violence and gender-based violence. And I think that is the role of the Department of Gender Affairs, just to be the coordinating body, but not the implementers, in that unless people are sensitive enough to see they have a responsibility to take action, then we are not going to get very far. So therefore, that workshop is to begin to ask different stakeholders to take on their rightful place in playing their role.
Madam Minister, Mr. Ambassador, we have come to the end of what has been quite a flowing discussion. I don't know if at any point in time you would like to extend your final thoughts for this discussion.
Only one sentence. Things won are done.
And I need to express the government of St. Lucia need to express its gratitude for the contribution and partnership with the French government, and they have always come to our rescue when we are most in need, and their support is most welcome.
Shared feeling.
This has been an enlightening discussion, so my thanks are extended both to you, Madam Minister, and you, Your Excellency. To our viewing audience joining us through various media platforms, thank you for joining us on this episode of Issues and Answers, a production of the National Television Network.